Street Fighter has always had cool stages, but I'm not here to point out obvious stuff like London has a train. This video is about the genius hidden details you're not seeing that make these stages work at a fundamental level, and how different types of light are used in the design of Street Fighter 6. But damn, that train is actually pretty cool too. Support these videos by becoming a channel member, and if you want to learn more about concepts like the ones discussed in this video and improve your art for free, then you can join the Learning Studio Discord server, link in the description. While the obvious thing to do here would be to break down the details of each stage, the fundamentals that make them work the most is actually shared between all of them. Ever heard of atmospheric perspective? It's a word I like to throw out there because it sounds complicated, but in reality it just refers to the atmosphere increasingly covering things that are further from you, and therefore changing the colour of things that are far away. You'd think this would apply more to a big open world game with sprawling landscapes than the relatively tiny fighting grounds here, but it's actually just as important. The fact these are 3D environments that you can only move around in 2D could be confusing, so they're broken down into layers of depth that are easier to digest. For example, here in London, the fog separates the fighters from people in the background, visually pushing back irrelevant information even if physically they're not that far away. All background characters and objects are grouped together by the fog and blue hues covering them, so even though you can clearly see them in 3D space, your brain separates the image into a binary of background elements and foreground characters. Street Fighter 6 also often helps reinforce the 2D path we're on by bringing background objects closer to you in certain parts of the stage. In fact, most of these have a very similar layout, where the middle section will act as a path that dives into the world to create a sense there's more here than we can explore, but on the left and right sides you'll be close to buildings or trees or an elephant that emphasize we can't move back on the Z axis here, it's blocked off. This also helps stages have variety in themselves. Each one feels like at least 2 or 3 mini locations within each location, which keeps things fresh, and helps you learn exactly how close you are to getting comboed to death up against the wall. There's beauty in simplicity sometimes for sure, and there's certainly beauty in anime references, but I think both in terms of visual appeal and game awareness, all of these stages work really well. The other trick they use for the 3D but actually 2D gameplay is to clearly define the path the playable characters have. Sometimes this is pretty obvious, like on Genbu Temple or Donkey Kong's freaking hut, but they have more subtle ways of pulling this off when the foreground and background aren't physically separated like this. For example, on Victiv, there's a pretty clear definition here where the background is enveloped in an unnatural warm light, but just outside of the carnival we're walking on a path of cool light, probably lit by the moon. This allows for fully realized 3D worlds behind us, while still guiding the player to understand the 2D path they have to walk on. It's kind of subtle, but uses a clear warm versus cool color contrast, and that brings us to... Okay, so the red versus blue thing is really common in media, and you'll often see this lighting setup in movies whenever there's an opportunity for it. Street Fighter 6 has made this a core staple of its visual design. From every menu to every UI element, we're always contrasting warm and cool. And sure, using red for player 1 and blue for player 2 is hardly uncommon, but they also make a point of using it in these stages, like, a lot. And not always in obvious ways, although sometimes it really is. Chun-Li's stage is a pretty clear example of this. The cool color of the night sky reflects from the roofs of these buildings and covers distant objects, allowing the striking red of the nearby architecture to really pop. Red is a distracting color, so it helps that the strongest hues are reserved for elements that are close to the fighters, while it becomes more muted in the distance thanks to our good friend atmospheric perspective. Even within our clearly defined fighting area, the 2D plane we walk on is lit by a warm light, presumably from these lanterns, while the background is unlit and has a cool blue hue because it's ambient light and the sky is blue. That last part is important, by the way, and we'll come back to that. Sometimes the warm and cool contrast is as simple as the sky is blue and the ground is like yellow, and in a couple of cases the contrast really isn't a big part of the design. In Barmalay Steelworks, they really wanted to emphasize the brutal heat, so cool colors are kept to a minimum like on the signs here. Oftentimes though, this contrast plays a huge role in clever ways that aren't obvious at first. Like here at the Old Town Market. There's no cool versus warm contrast here, right? It's just a street full of a bunch of Shit. Wrong. Over here on the right side of the stage, this fruit stand is packed with warm red, yellow, and brown colors, with some contrasting blue elements there for good measure. While if we come over to the left side of the screen, we're in Blue Town now, and I can assure you it's not a coincidence this bike, this graffiti, and some parts of this tuk-tuk are specifically red. Capcom aren't throwing random colors at the wall to see what sticks. The palette is limited, simplified, and contrasting in a way that always represents the one-on-one nature of street fighting. Yeah. Now let's talk more about ambient light and direct light. Again, this might sound complicated, but I promise you it's really not, and having a solid understanding of these subjects is what allowed the Street Fighter 6 team to make these stages so visually appealing. So, direct light is light being hit by a light source directly, and ambient light is not. To put it simply, if you're outside, areas hit by the sun are in direct light, while shadows are in ambient light. Now, despite the fact your eyes can adjust in an instant, you can only really focus on one of these at a time. If you make your phone camera focus on ambient light inside your room, any direct light in the frame will appear blindingly bright. Change your focus to the direct light, and any ambient lights will appear extremely dark. The most important takeaway we need from this is that if you have ambient light and direct light, whichever your eye or the camera isn't adjusting to will have lower detail, since the appropriate amount of light isn't being let in or blocked out to properly see in that area. Now look at Bather's Beach. There's a shadow here caused by the palm trees, so we can immediately see where the ambient light and direct light is. Our characters are in direct light, and of course the camera is focused on them. This means these guys back here can be simplified down to essentially just a silhouette, despite not being that far away from the player characters. They're extremely low detail, but it doesn't look bad because the designers are using ambient light and our good friend atmospheric perspective again to their advantage. This low detail is good for performance reasons, but also ensures background details aren't distracting from the gameplay, and helps build the scene with silhouettes, which can be easily and quickly read by the eye. Most stages are in direct light, with Metrocity Downtown being an exception. Here the characters are in the shadows of the buildings, which is of course ambient light. This means the rays of sunlight back here are out of focus, creating an overwhelming glow, and allowing the backgrounds to fade off into low detail. But that brings me to a great property of ambient light that's used extremely well here. It's a submissive bitch that's really easy to manipulate. Like your fucking mum. Direct light is generally going to be the color it's lit by, whether that's white or yellow or blue or anything else. Fairly straightforward. Ambient light is far weaker and will take on the color of reflected light around it. The classic lighting combo we all know and love is warm sunlight contrasted by cool ambient light, or at least that's what I've read online. I don't actually go outside. The reason the ambient light in this situation is a cool blue color is because the biggest thing around you to reflect light is, well, the sky. So okay, Street Fighter. They use these ambient light areas really well to create some really cool effects with the nearby neon lights. If this alleyway was in direct light, this effect simply wouldn't work because the sun would overwhelm everything else. But in the shadows, this neon purple creates a really unique mood, and again does that thing where the right side of the stage and the left side of the stage have their own unique identities. But the whole stage doesn't have to be in ambient light for this to happen. In Suvahal Arena, the flickering of the candles can be seen in the shadows below these ribbons. And again, heading back to Jamaica, the ambient light on the right side is lit by these neon green lights. Notice how we can tell these lights are green even though they actually appear white, because they're brighter than our eyes are adjusted to. Your brain is so good at understanding light for you, you'd be surprised what things actually look like most of the time. Yeah. Now let's briefly talk about composition. Stages often have clear focal points, with the rest of the geometry leading to it. On the aircraft carrier, these aeroplanes all face inward for a reason. They're leading you into the stage instead of pushing the eye out. This is particularly obvious on the Paris and London stages. Here you can see how the setup leads you to Big Ben, which sticks out and has its own unique silhouette. It's designed so you can take it all in without even really looking at it. The atmosphere in this stage is really cool, by the way. The foggy steampunk aesthetic works so well for London. Really makes me feel like I'm about to be stabbed. By the way, I'm fairly certain the advert on the side of this bus is a reference to Harrods, which is a fairly famous shop in London. Okay, so I really like the reflections of the water underneath this hut. The sunlight is hitting it at just the right angle to get a nice effect like this. I'd also like to quickly point out that most of Capcom's ideas here are actually directly stolen from Overwatch. You've got Nepal, King's Row, Hanamura, British people, gay people, aggressive and manipulative monetization, it's all here. And with that said, check out the Overanalyzing Visuals playlist, including my other Street Fighter 6 video, where I break down the menus and how color and light is used on the playable characters. If you want to learn more about concepts like this and improve your art for free, then you can join the Learning Studio Discord server. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and become a channel member. So that's about it for now. Thank you for watching and goodbye.